From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I am Ken Davis. Why don't we begin today with a couple of data points from a report that was produced this week by Politico. Seems Donald Trump's share of the vote that tended to drop in accordance with the number of homes in a given county with news subscriptions. There's a lot of detail to this report, and you really ought to read it on your own. But the essence is that in places without independent fact-checking news operations, Trump did very well in the 2016 election and continues to do so. In areas where a variety of voices proliferate, like in bigger cities, for example, Hillary Clinton did much better. This shouldn't be surprising. It was true 250 years ago, right? When the founders of our country recognized the critical role of the press and they enshrined that freedom right at the top of the Bill of Rights. Well, a little more than a year ago, things were so dire here in Chicago at our beloved Sun-Times that it seemed like the wings were scraping on the ground. But a couple of investors came along. It's a long story. Believe me, it's a long story. But anyway, a group of investors was able to acquire the paper, and they've been pretty quickly bringing it back as an independent Chicago voice. It's a very steep hill to climb, but they're doing well enough to claim that Chicago is, as it should rightly be, with its proud history of boodle and corruption and avarice, a two-newspaper town. A couple of weeks ago, the new company unveiled a new design for the printed paper, a new, vastly more functional online presence, a fleet of new podcasts, digital programming. It makes your head spin. So when I say to you that Chicago is a two-newspaper town, how do you react? Do you ask, remind me again, what is this thing, this newspaper of which you speak? That's the life of a newspaper executive today, and that's why we're so happy to have the Sun-Times editor-in-chief here today, making a triumphant return from back when he was a watchdog reporter with Chicago Sun-Times, Chris Fusco. So great to have you here. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time today. You're the editor-in-chief of the Chicago Sun-Times. You probably didn't expect 10 years ago that you'd be editor-in-chief.
No, not at all. Really enjoyed my years as a reporter, though, and it's funny, like in this role, looking at the business side of things, it's almost like filing a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request on your own company. And now the same things you were looking for in government, you're looking for within the books of your own
Why don't I
your own
have
entity.
This?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what is the, I guess every paper is different, but now at your company, what is the editor-in-chief? There's a lot of new brass.
Sure. I mean, and it's a much different management model than what we've been accustomed to over the years.
This is not the movie version, some fat guy in suspenders with a cigar in his mouth.
Absolutely not.
That guy.
But what we do have is we kind of have a multifaceted management team, and just to kind of walk you through the different parts of it. Carol Fowler is also involved in the news operation. She is Senior VP of Digital Products.
Okay.
So she's kind of handling the video and podcasting end of things. We have a Chief Digital Strategist, Matt Watson, who came from Vox Media. Obviously, all media aficionados are familiar with Vox. If they're not, it's a news explainer site. Also runs several subsidiary websites, including SB Nation, which is one of the world's biggest sports websites. We've got a vibrant chief operating officer in Nakia Wright, who kind of keeps us all on point and on task. We've got an SVP of advertising in Allison Leif, and we've got the CEO.
An editor-in-chief. Oh, and
a
CEO.
Who oversees us all, Edwin Eisendrath, who's obviously, as you know, former Chicago alderman.
Sure.
Great connections throughout the Chicago community, background in government, business, Harvard business grad. So it's a very interesting time right now to be part of this team. Whereas before it was kind of a editor-publisher model, sometimes with those roles combined. Used to be more of a publisher role to oversee the business, editor oversees the newsroom side. So this is a new model designed for a new day.
As rightly it should be.
Right.
So what is your clearest, and how could you more clearly describe your responsibility? Do you put the printed newspaper out every day? Is that your job?
I would say I don't like to call it print. I like to call it text.
Okay.
Because we're moving into the, into the new world here, and obviously, text, print, the print newspaper is a big part of text, but text is also a lot of what people are consuming online.
Okay, well, see, that's why I was asking you the specific thing about the print, because a lot of times, it seems like you guys are maybe getting this right, a lot of times in newsrooms that were evolving from something else, from a printed newspaper or even broadcast, when they had to deal with online, they brought in people to do the online side. I've seen this happen. And what happens is you end up with the folks who did the traditional stuff, the print or the broadcast, they get kind of sequestered on one side, and the two things don't talk to each other very often.
Yeah, and we're really trying to make this one newsroom. And are there hiccups along the way? Absolutely. I mean, we are moving forward, trying every day to kind of figure out, where the search engines are, where digital readership is, where's print readership, and it's a constant evolving process.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you more about that, because to me it's just something that's incredibly fascinating, and it really reflects the future of the industry and even the survival of the industry, getting those things right.
But integration is key to that.
Yeah, it is. It is, because it always seemed to me that there needed to be one. It really has to be an individual, but there needs to be a force at the top of this pyramid that says the story we're covering today, that we're putting our emphasis on, is thus and such, and I want it in tomorrow morning's paper, but I also, as you say, it's text. It needs to be out there now. It needs to be pushed. It needs to be out in the sites. It needs to be on iOS. It needs to be everywhere. And that individual who makes that decision has got to make that decision for the whole company.
Yeah, well, I think it's more of almost like a philosophical thing. Like, for example, if you've got a breaking news story, obviously we want to be first on that, right? We also want to be right. So maybe it's something as simple as, and this was a tradition, begun under Jim Kirk when he was at the Sun-Times, my old boss. We try to get out one sentence, 150 words, something quick that we can just get out there, get it out into the world. One of the great things about our new structure at the Sun-Times is we have a dedicated audience team of folks who can then take that content, that 150 words, get it out on social media, tweet it, Facebook it, Instagram it, other things, alert it if need be, if it's that big, and start to get that out into consumption, while we have editors back, on the news desk who can work with reporters to keep building out that story. So as a video content from the scene comes in, that audience team can figure out, okay, we're going to put that here. Now we're going to re-push that story. And it's a much different process, right? And it can create situations that frankly are very challenging for us, because as stories are evolving, we don't have that minute to sit back and say, was that really, is that the best way to construct that sentence?
Those days are gone.
Those days are done.
They're just gone.
But it's contributed to, I think, some of the other problems in the industry. It in some ways, us trying to get it right and be thoughtful about it, but occasionally maybe needing to craft that sentence a better way in 10 minutes, it's kind of what enables the fake news
that's where it lives.
to slip in there.
It lives in the mold that's created from that process. We can't go much further without actually talking about the fact that, well, let's put it this way. A couple days ago, I was just at my favorite coffee shop lunch place having my chicken sandwich, and I pulled up the Sun-Times site, on the mobile site, and sat there for my entire lunch on the Sun-Times site. And afterward I thought, this is revolutionary. I mean, this is such a change, because we can be frank about this. The Sun-Times website was just a disgrace. It was awful. It amazed me that so many professionals who claim to know so much about social media and digital media could put together such a shameful I mean, it's in the past now, but
it is in the past. But I mean, let's address that a little bit, because obviously the whole industry is trying to figure out the magic formula, and really the Sun-Times site's downfall was when previous ownership decided to create a national network based around the Sun-Times, and then those sites all kind of got standardized. Our site kind of lost its uniqueness.
Yes, it did.
We were able to take it back and kind of rebuild a couple different versions of it. And now this is our latest iteration. So we have been gradually recovering from that, you know, kind of Michael Farrow strategy. Now, that was one of many strategies, you know, Michael Farrow had.
Yes,
and you know, you can say what you want about the state of the industry, say what you want about Michael Farrow and issues there and allegations that have been in the news, but, you know, there was I will give us this, we were trying, right? And clearly that strategy did not work.
Right.
So
because you're trying, your efforts couldn't cut through the crap that had just been laid over everything.
Right. And there were probably, you know, a big part of that failed strategy was those sites were largely populated in other markets with very sketchy content.
By bots. Probably.
Bots and pricking up Facebook posts and press releases and aggregation, and not that aggregation is bad in all cases,
right,
but
of course.
But it was a failed strategy. So that is, you're right, that is in the rearview mirror. But I just want to explain, you know, yes, we have, you know, many. A question I get all the time is, well, weren't you part of that? And, well,
sure.
I was part of the company.
Yes, you were.
And
Yeah, you were
I
in
was
the
a
company.
reporter for most of it, but there was a willingness to try something radically different, and it was a big failure, and now we are rebuilding.
Well, I think there's also something to say about Ed Eisendrath's strategy of picking up a company that basically built websites, so that was kind of built into your structure from the beginning. You have that expertise. You bought that expertise with it, right?
Yeah, although you know, a hat tip here. I mean, Edwin also forged a partnership with Ogilvy, which is, strangely enough, was when we were at the 350 North Orleans building. Ogilvy was a floor above us.
Oh, is that right?
And we never really interacted with them. And then Edwin comes in, moves us out to 30 North Racine.
Right.
And now we're interacting with Ogilvy all the time.
So you got to go over there all the time.
Well, we go back and forth between the two, but they were a huge part of this rebranding, both in print and digitally, and they continue to be partners with us on that.
Well, I just didn't want to get far into this conversation without saying that it's more than a website. The digital presence of the Sun-Times is dramatically better than it was a month ago.
Yes.
And it works, and there's lots of stuff on it, and you can actually live there for a while and click around and find interesting things. And it used to be that it was always just the same 3 or 4 stories keeping coming up on it. We won't, let's drop it.
Right.
But congratulations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. A lot of people obviously put a lot of work into it.
And it is really a team effort, and we have, you know, more people in place now. I mean, if you know, just even since we've launched the new site, it turns over a lot more frequently. There's a lot more, you know, news. Sometimes people are asking me, where'd that story go? Because it wasn't, you know, we have people making decisions based on analytics, looking, you know, things that, you know, frankly, other good media companies have been doing for a long time. And we're now in that ball game, and it feels good to be in that ball game, but there's still a long way to go.
Must give you white knuckles.
Yes.
Just trying to figure out, oh my God.
Oh yeah, no, for regional, I mean, you know, there is no doubt the regional news organization is facing extremely strong headwinds right now, and we had other headwinds to deal with before that.
Right, so maybe taking just those off, now it gets you in the game of trying to compete like everybody else or something, I don't know. So how do you measure success at this point? I mean, is it's not just, obviously it's not just circulation of the paper. What's success?
Oh, sure, you know, ultimately success is going to be sustainability and bending the line financially. Edwin always talks about bending the line, you know, making sure, you know, trying to reduce the losses that have historically plagued our news organization. But we're also looking at our digital growth. I mean, page views, sessions, engagement time for us are all up across the board. People seem to be, you know, paying attention to us.
If you build it, they will come.
Right. So the next step is how do we take some of these new products that we're rolling out, podcasting, Food with Linda Yu, live video, which we saw on election night just be an enormous success for us.
That was, that had to have been a misprint, because you said in one of your stories that you got 120,000 views to your live video thing?
Yeah, to the live video.
That puts you in competition with the big time TV stations.
Right, and that puts us, well, that was combined with the Democratic gubernatorial debate, which is held much in it. We have a studio in our facility at 30 North Racine that's very much like this. So, that was the gubernatorial forum and the Lynn Sweet election night show combined. Yeah. But what it shows you is there is an appetite for that kind of specialty content. And also, another hat tip to, Carol, Matt, and Tanvir Ali, who is a new, digital journalist that has come aboard from DNA Info to help us. The sites that we built for the election, stuff that we had been doing under previous regimes, candidate questionnaires, candidate profiles, candidate video. This time we made that live in an optimized, easy to find place on the site with SEO optimization. And you could see in the run up to the election, the page views for that kind of content, you could see the public wanting that. Yeah. And before they couldn't really find it, and it was all this hard work that kind of, for lack of a better term, went to waste. Now it was lighting up the charts, and then that builds momentum toward the live show. Right. And that builds momentum to graphics and other things that we had for this election that we had never had before digitally. So
I got to tell you, I didn't watch much of the Lynn Sweet thing because I was actually working over at WCPT that night. But I went back and watched, I spot checked all the way through it. And I just have to tell you, my reaction to it is that in 10 years or 12 years or whatever odd number election it is, you'll be looking back at that and laughing at all of the roughness of it.
Oh, yeah.
But it had heart, it had spirit. It was, see, David Resnick is on the other side of the glass. He and I used to work together at WBEZ years ago, and he's helping out here with producing now. And we were talking about this and reminiscing about the fact that in the early 80s at BEZ, that's what our stuff looked like, because we had no resources, and we had a bunch of people who were kind of talented, and they kind of knew they wanted to do something, but we just didn't have the mechanics, the equipment. We didn't have the experience, so we were just putting stuff out there. And it really reminded me of that, even though Lynn Sweet was actually with us in those early years back at BEZ too. But it was so cool to watch, because you're doing this thing, and she's saying at parts, and we're doing this live from the Sun-Times newsroom.
Right.
And that just gives me chills, because I think that's just a very cool place to be broadcasting from. So, it was a great effort, and it's going to get nothing but better.
There was a Herculean effort that night, and I was doing my text thing, Carol was in her office kind of in Election Central. And, I do have to say, though, the nature of that show is kind of fly by the seat of your pants, right? Because things are coming in and whatnot. Right. As far as like the digital graphics went, I mean, we looked like a fully produced, television program, which is something I never envisioned. Right.
But eventually you'll have producers, and you'll have production meetings about what time you're going to do this and this and this.
We got to get people to support us.
Yeah.
The philosophy we are kind of embracing right now as a brand is to rebuild that brand and kind of reintroduce ourselves to Chicagoans. In many ways, we're a startup.
Yes, absolutely.
A 70-year-old startup.
That's right.
With roots going back 150 years. So it's a very odd time to kind of get people. We're trying to get back into people's consciousness again.
But you see, the other thing about this is that newspapers, printed newspapers, were very confining. You had this number of words, and no matter how big a personality you were, even if you were a columnist, you still were kind of squeezed into that hole. Digital allows these people to become people right in front of your very eyes. So, there you are. You got Mary Mitchell out there. You got, Mark Brown and everybody just kind of sitting at the table. And it's a whole different level of humanness. And I also just want to tell you, boy, this just sounds like some kind of fanboy thing here. We'll have to get more onto other things, but I just love your Mary Mitchell and Leslie Baldacci thing. I think it's really an interesting conversation between two people who are not your average podcasting 28-year-olds.
Right.
They're more mature women. They've known each other for a long time. They've been around a long time. One's white, one's black, and they've lived in Chicago. They've lived through these experiences, and they sit there and talk to each other in a way that with a conversation that just really can't happen very much in Chicago.
Well, I will
and it's cool.
pass that on.
I really enjoy listening to it.
Jennifer Schulze is working very hard to try to get those out in circulation and come up. We've got Rick Tellender and Rick Morrissey. We've got Mark Lazarus, our Blackhawks beat writer. I mean, we're trying to figure out how to integrate some of that content. I mean, as you got Linda, you on your print product there, we're trying to figure out how to make all the pieces come together to maximize the reach of all those digital products in conjunction with the print.
So what are your research people telling you about, this is a more universal question that all news organizations are dealing with, putting audio and putting video into your digital product? There's a sense you have that if you're just kind of like sitting on the train or something and you're reading through something and then you bump into audio, you bump into video, you just skip over it because you just want the text.
And that's still that is still a hurdle for all media companies. If you notice, there's a lot more captioning on video now.
Absolutely.
Because people are on the train, or if they don't have headphones, they sit there and hopefully they will watch those captions. Obviously the success with live is very interesting to me. I mean, not having a lot of exposure, this is not my area of expertise at the paper, so I am learning as I go and watching the experts. It's pretty wild to watch and see what resonates. The kind of the weird thing about it is even 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago when I took over as managing editor, we were still doing a lot of video then. It just wasn't distributed the way it is now. It was clips, it was rough, it was, it distributed through YouTube. Now we have a more dedicated player for this. We've got folks who can edit it. And I think it's making a difference. We're still early in the game here as far as this
Well,
stuff
I don't think the New York Times has figured it out, or the Washington Post either. I mean, they're experimenting with a lot of different things.
Everybody is experimenting.
And now the new thing, of course, because of the Daily at the New York Times, this is the new conventional wisdom, is that, newsrooms are dead. You just need to put out a podcast in the morning, and that'll go away in 6 months too. I mean, it's nobody really knows.
Right. Well, if you look at media companies in general, and this is two observations. Number one is that when you and I were growing up, we had this antenna on the roof. The TV came in for free, right? And everybody paid. Everybody paid to get the newspaper.
Garfield Goose.
So somewhere along the line, that got reversed, and everybody paid exorbitant rates for TV. And internet comes, and the industry decides we need to put all of our content for free online. So that needs to be, reobserved and rethought industry-wide. The other part of this is that we're striving with these products. For us, it's a newspaper. For Channel 7 or Channel 9, it's a television station, a TV broadcast. For WBEZ and WBBM, it's 24/7 radio programming. But we're all moving toward the same space.
That's right.
In the middle. And it is news when you want it, when you need it. In-depth, niche
in the
stories.
medium that you want.
Right, in the medium that you want, and all trying to kind of converge into the same space. And that's where the battle is. So the challenge for us is, how do we continue to put out an engaging newspaper while moving into the space that everybody else is and competing there?
And getting people to pay for it.
Key part.
There's that too.
And getting people to advertise it.
A number of years back, we did a thing, Chicago Journalism Town Hall, and one of my enduring memories of that was the, at that time, young people who kind of came in. They were students who were sitting in the back and were chanting at us, "Information wants to be free." And that has been really the mantra for forever. And we're now finally beginning to understand that information is a product, and products require producing, and that requires resources, and so it can't be completely free. And what you get, I would argue, when you live in the "I only want free information" world, is there's plenty of people out there, Russians and bots and everybody else, willing to provide you with free information.
And hopefully the public is waking up to that. I mean, the timing of our discussion comes on the heels of, Facebook having to kind of face the music,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right,
And CEO standing up there in front of Congress having to explain, the role that folks played in screening content during the election process. I'm hoping the public is paying attention,
Yeah.
because it is a reason why, whether it's the Tribune, the Sun-Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, why people need to support us. And it really is. I mean, I joke, Edwin and I joke, one of Edwin's great lines is we're gonna use journalism to save the democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And while that sounds high-minded and high-idealed, it's kind of true.
Yeah.
We need strong regional brands to keep an eye on our power structure, to tell the stories of that move people, and be serious and still have fun.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
if you could present that in a compelling way
Mm-hmm.
on a bunch of different platforms, hopefully the public notices,
Yeah.
and hopefully that's how you measure success.
Well, I, as you know from years of appearing from time to time on this show, I just absolutely worship at the altar of investigative journalism. I think it's the most
We do
important
too.
thing we have. I know you do. It's the most important thing we have, and there has to be a way. There just has to be a way that it will continue to be supported. And for the first time in maybe this year, I'm actually beginning to be a little bit optimistic that maybe it's going to work, and maybe we owe that all to President Trump. Maybe he's caused that. He's demonstrated to us the need for fact-based journalism.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about big changes in the industry,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not-for-profit support of investigative journalism has become a huge, and Chicago is a great example. ProPublica is here. Better Government Association has been here for generations and continues to produce, a robust operation. WBEZ's hiring of Dave McKinney in and of itself expands their
And now
reach.
having, what is it? They have 5 people working education just
right,
alone.
right,
This
right.
is weird for somebody who worked there when there were 5 people in the entire place. But
Right. So I mean, there is a lot of City Bureau on the south side. Chicago Reporter
Yes.
is still,
Still kicking out
alive and
there.
kicking
Yeah,
and producing.
Well, your own
good-
Chicago Reader, by the way. Let's
Chicago
mention
Reader
that.
is doing investigative work. Maya and Company. So it's what I'm a little bit more concerned about, frankly, is I think the I mean, obviously we watchdogs. We see that as a pillar at the Sun-Times, and I wish I could clone all of them and then hire 14 more, but we can't do that. Given the way the financial realities of the business are,
And also the medical realities of cloning.
correct. But that said, too, I feel like as an industry, we really need to get back to some basic beat reporting, and there are certain beats that I feel like we as an industry used to cover better: religion, transportation, environment, not necessarily investigations. We still do a lot of investigations in those arenas, but day-to-day people. To go to those meetings, sit there, look at the agenda, see what people say, and start fanning out and doing it the old-fashioned way.
Did DNA Info teach you guys some lessons?
I think DNA Info taught us a lot. I think DNA Info taught us that people have a voracious appetite for local journalism.
Yeah.
And everything from where the parking ticket's being handed out on my block to what new restaurant is opening.
Yeah.
And I think, it's funny, Seamus Toomey is a colleague of mine back from the Daily Herald and the Sun-Times, and you hear his philosophy on DNA Info, and I doubt it's going to change much on Block Club, but it's that Daily Herald model that was ingrained into our systems when we were working back out into the suburbs.
That's interesting.
You've got a in Schaumburg, there's a mayor and there's a town council and there's a school board, and you're going to go to all those meetings, and that's
because
where you're gonna
suburban covering a suburb is smaller, so the
But if you look at a Chicago neighborhood, there's an alderman.
Right.
There's a local school
It's a
council. To apply that model and then do the grunt work at City Hall, trying to look at development.
Yeah.
And it's a winning formula. Now there's unfortunately it's a formula that couldn't sustain itself.
Right.
And yes, you can talk
It
about
costs money.
It costs money. The unionization issue ultimately became a potential hurdle there in terms of cost and maybe some political philosophy there with Joe Ricketts and his views on life and business.
Yeah.
But overall, if the costs can be managed the right way, it's going to be interesting to see what Block Club can do. I mean, I think a lot of what Seamus and Jen Sabella, Stephanie are doing over there is tapping in. They had a Kickstarter, right? Support us, and it was enormously successful.
Sure was.
So I think there's probably some lessons for the Sun-Times to be learned from their effort and what happened with DNA.
Yeah. Well, it's just really interesting to see. It's great to sit here with you and have what's basically an optimistic conversation. It feels like I've been doing the show for 8 years, and it feels like this is the first time that there is that kind of that glimmer that maybe this is going to work its way out. The Tribune is unionizing. I mean, what does that tell you? What's your takeaway from that?
Well, I mean, I think journalists everywhere, and again, we've seen this, regional brands, right? Regional brands that used to be the #1 sources of news in their communities. Denver Post, another great example there. Ownership comes in, and what unionization is becoming is a tool for the journalist to have a seat at the table at brands that, traditionally have been the fat cats in town, and we've all hit a point here where, media companies, I mean, even Vox, which has had enormous success digitally, they've got a union newsroom that, convened relatively recently. So it's a reality of the industry. And I say that as somebody who's been on both sides of the table, right? This is, I mean, the Sun-Times, we are in kind of, it's sort of a bizarro land, right? Because we are a somewhat largely owned union organization. We're owned by unions and groups of philanthropic individuals. Yet I'm management, and I'm dealing with a union to try to keep the lights on, and we're all trying to work together.
Right.
And I'm hoping that our model is a good way to move forward. And I think what you're seeing at the Tribune is there's a reality that they want, their journalists want more of a seat at the table because they don't trust the moves that are being made. Yeah. And I don't think anybody can blame them. And it's happening. I mean, the New York, the Denver Post editorial basically calling out their own ownership on the front page of the print paper. Yeah. I mean, these are
editorial saying, "Please sell us."
Please do the right thing. And what makes it incredible in Denver is, if there's a paper that should be thriving, a regional brand, I mean, population is up, development's up, the city is growing leaps and money everywhere. Why is the newspaper in a one market town, which shows you too the competition we have here in a 2-market town, why is that paper failing?
Hey, speaking of 2-market town, there's we are, as you proudly boast, we are a 2-newspaper or a I would say a 2-news shop town, but whatever it is, 2-newspaper town.
2 dailies.
2 daily.
Many weeklies.
Yes, 2 daily town. And you guys put out a really, what should we call it? Perky little 60-second spot. Can we watch it for a second? Let's just watch it.
Absolutely, go ahead.
There are 2 daily newspapers in Chicago. One that relates and one that doesn't. One whose priority is hard-working people, and another whose priorities aren't so clear. One that stands together with those who stand up for themselves, and another that sits in judgment. One that's not afraid to get their hands dirty. Another that keeps their distance. One that understands your struggles, and one that struggles to understand. One that is written in blood, sweat, and tears, and another that's written us off. One that covers the stories that most matter to you, and another that covers the ones that matter to them. There are 2 newspapers in Chicago, but only one that works as hard as you do. The Chicago Sun-Times, the hardest working paper in America.
So, how do we react to that? for the last couple of years, as newspapers have been punching bags all over the place, there's been this kind of truce that's happened between the Sun-Times and the Tribune. You guys are both more like
frenemies,
yeah,
as it was once described.
Well, I
yes.
was going to say, like, you know, both being victimized by the same brutalizer or something. And so you kind of laid off of this, but boy, you've like reopened the war. This is kind of
yeah. Well, you know, we're
snarky, isn't it?
It's, you know, this is a complicated subject, right? Because obviously, I have a lot of respect for the journalists at the Chicago Tribune. I think they have a lot of respect for us.
And friends across, friends and marriages all across.
Right, I'm one of them. My wife works at the Tribune.
I forgot that. I wasn't
right.
even referencing.
So,
that's right.
So
yes,
there's a lot of those.
I totally forgot about that.
So that said, I do think we need to differentiate ourselves from them, and that's what the branding strategy and the campaign is all about. You know, and you know, obviously, you know, they are in a period where they are enduring many of the challenges that we have had to endure.
Yeah.
We're trying to, you know, we've had to make painful decisions on our side from some personnel and content standpoints, but it's all with the interest of trying to appeal to what readers want now, both in print and digitally. So as a result, there's a lot of upheaval, and I think to draw a distinction between you know, the Colonel McCormick brand of the world and the hardest working paper in America. That's what we got to do.
That's you. That's your paper.
That's ours.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I got to say that I mean, I really just kind of got a snicker out of it when I watched it. I was kind of laughing. I thought it was really kind of cool to see. And my immediate reaction was, I can't wait for the time when both of you are strong enough that the Tribune will start attacking you too. You know, let's get back into it. Let's have some real. So let's talk a little bit about independence of the Sun-Times. Edwin Eisendrath, when he took over, was adamant, and of course you're the thing we just watched, adamant about the independence of the Chicago Sun-Times. But critics say, how can you be independent when your main ownership is unions? So you always have to deal with the issue that you, as editor-in-chief, that your product is being tainted in some way or being dictated in some way by the Chicago Federation of Labor.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, ultimately it's up to the reader to decide. You know, I think our journalism has remained extremely independent. Obviously, we have always touted ourselves as an independent newspaper. I think our coverage decisions, you know, things, obviously we are trying to appeal to a working person's leadership, readership, whether that is a person who is in a union or whether that is a white collar tech industry worker. So there's going to be more of a focus on the working, you know, individual. You know, again, like the marketing material says, the paper of the 99%. You know,
right.
So that's, you know, that's our. Ultimately, the public can judge us, and if they want to sit here and say that we're not fair, we're not independent, that's their right. It's my job, Carol's job, you know, management team's job to keep that independent tradition in place. And I think right now, you know, several months into it, I think we're doing the same thing we've always done, and that's calling it like we see it.
How does the editorial process work? The editorial board obviously is an independent board.
But ownership, I mean, has its say in editorials and endorsements, and that's not just the case with us. It's that way at papers across the country.
Sure.
You know, in an ideal world, the Sun-Times would be like the Washington Post. We'd have a situation where I, as, you know, editor-in-chief, would be completely separate, and we would have enough people to do that editorial page on their own. This is a little bit of a vestige back to the editor-publisher model. You know, I as editor-in-chief have to basically edit editorials every day. And
you do? That was my question.
I mean, I am the final line edit on, you know, our excellent editorial board's work. And I might add, you know, they do a lot more than write editorials on an editorial board. I mean, a lot of that elections content, interviewing, databasing video was done by Tom McNamee, Tom Frisbee, Marilyn Garcia, and we're lucky enough to have Lorraine Forte join us after the election on the editorial board from The Reporter.
So Tom McNamee is editorial page editor. He
Yes.
reports to you then?
Yes.
He doesn't have an independent line?
Right.
So the other thing that I was wondering about is Jorge Ramos. He quit as the head of the.
So yeah, we're still.
But he's the chairman of Sun-Times.
Yes, and all of that is still being sorted out in terms of Jorge Ramirez's role on our board. He's been a great steadying force, frankly. He has said publicly he wants to stay on. Obviously, the CFL, I believe, could say, Jorge, they're cool with Jorge remaining as board chair, so we'll see how that all shakes out.
Would CFL have the power to put someone else in there, to take him out and put someone in?
You know, I don't know enough about the corporate governance structure of the board. I am not a board member. I occasionally have to get into a board meeting and get grilled about various things. So, but ultimately, I think the board is very stable right now. I think whatever happens with Jorge, I think we're going to have a pretty interesting, diverse board. I mean, even within labor and Len Goodman and all the investors. It's a good group, it's a diverse group, and that's good for our news organization.
I mean, I guess the real question that I guess I was trying to ask is, new management coming in at CFL might say, we just don't want this deal anymore. We just don't want to be a part of this.
I mean,
and would that hurt the Sun-Times if they did that?
What's been reported publicly is that Bob Reiter, who is the secretary of the CFL, he appears to be the leading candidate to replace Jorge. Bob has a good knowledge of media. He's often on Ben Jarofsky's radio show.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
So Bob has an interest in media. He's been around as the CFL's CFL representative. He is not on the board right now, but he has a good knowledge of our operation. And I don't think you're going to see any wavering from the CFL in their support of the Sun-Times.
Do you make personnel decisions, like there have been a few sort of high-profile things, like Richard Roper. Is that you?
Twitter.
Am I talking to the right guy?
Making them in concert with the team. Yeah, I mean it's a team effort. But yeah, we have to deal. It's been a very interesting year that way.
Yeah, it has. I mean, the Richard Roper thing is a really interesting issue because it sort of went national, and it wasn't just about him. It was a phenomenon that we started noticing. But the background, it turns out that he had a couple 100,000 followers or something that were not actually his, that had been
the final number we were able to pin down was 50,000.
50,000
were purchased.
Okay. And anyway, that's not. We don't need to really to get that. The point is that you had already announced that he would be doing a kind of a news-oriented column.
Right.
And then after all the negotiations settled down and it was clear that Richard was going to stick around, the part that changed was he was no longer going to be doing that. And it raises an interesting question. If he's good enough to keep on as the movie reviewer, why isn't he good enough to do the thing that you wanted him to do?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think when it came to Rich, and Rich was, obviously you played a role in this decision. We just didn't edict it down and say, Rich, this is what we're doing. I mean, Rich understood that there was a breach of the public trust here, in buying these followers. And obviously, since Rich's situation, it came out that, a Tribune employee had done something similar, right?
Yeah.
And other journalists. So the question here is how much of that was an industry factor, right? People in media and others buying these followers. Our key thing was we wanted to make sure that there was no knowledge that Rich's understanding and other journalists' understanding was that these were legit people, right? These were not bots that would then go and influence elections. And once we were able to establish what Rich knew about what he was doing, then it came down to weighing that breach of the public trust versus rolling him out as somebody who was, when you're a news columnist, one of the subjects that you're probably going to have to write about is fake news. Yeah. And neither Rich nor us nor Edwin really wanted to put him in that position. None of these followers impacted his decisions on what he covers, his opinions on things. So that's where we saw him as continuing to take on a robust entertainment role and we would back off the news column for now.
And he is more visible in the paper than he was a while
Yes,
back.
yes.
And yeah.
Yes.
Of course, the other one is Hetty Weiss. That was a nasty situation that you guys were in there, and you. Seems to me that you took a public stance of saying that you were going to stand with Hetty Weiss after she got into a big kerfuffle with the Steppenwolf Theater and all that. And then very shortly afterward, she was gone.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the
I
whole
understand.
ins and outs of personnel
But I'd just like to
decisions,
hear
but-
what you can tell us about
Well,
it.
I can tell you generally that the way we are making personnel decisions at the paper is toward trying to keep it alive, and maintain robust growth across all platforms.
Yeah.
So any decision that we're making on personnel is in the interest of trying to best serve our readers. And people are going to disagree with us. You're not always going to disagree with us as managers, but we are doing the best we can given the tools that are allotted to us, and that's how decisions are made.
This is a really tricky one because of everything we've been talking about today about unions and about being on one side or the other and all that. An organization like yours and bosses like you kind of have to figure out how much money you got for personnel, and sometimes it might be easier to let go of somebody and just bring in some freelancers to do that job.
Yeah, I mean, again, the industry is facing enormous challenges, but we are a guild shop at the Sun-Times, and there are rules that I have to abide by, where if the guild perceives me as not complying with those rules, or the team in general, there's a process there. I think that's another reason why you're seeing unionization happening at media organizations across
Absolutely
the country,
right.
whether they're legacy print brands or digital ones like Vox and Gawker.
Yeah. This is just jumping around. A topic that we've talked about a lot here is since Zucky is in front of the Congress as we speak, he's testifying right now. The role that Facebook has played in all of this decimation of news organizations, because it's almost impossible to be in the news business without being a partner of Facebook at this point. And we've had a lot of conversation about that.
Right, and Facebook tried Instant Article. We signed up for that. It was not a winning proposition for us monetarily, so we dialed that back. But yeah, it is a weird relationship right now between Facebook, Google, Twitter, legacy media brands. There's
They're
no
eating
doubt about
what
it.
little bit of advertising revenue that is out there.
Right. So the question becomes, how do and then at the same time they've launched some initiatives in which they're trying to support legacy media, right? So it really remains to be seen how this is all going to come together, and ultimately where do we head up? I don't know. What has history taught us? Government broke up the railroads, right? Maybe we're headed toward an era where there's more government regulation or government breaking up of some of these big entities. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. And obviously, the election issues that surfaced in the 2016 presidential election put a white-hot spotlight on that with Mark Zuckerberg, having to testify. And privacy and other things, those are all really huge questions.
Yeah. See that tweet yesterday of the picture of Mark Zuckerberg, and it was that look you have when all you wanted to do was create something to evaluate the looks of women on campus, and you ended up putting a fascist in the biggest country in the world. It's just a hilarious tweet, but anyway, neither here nor there. To sum up, how do you think readers are using your product now differently than a couple of years ago or even 20 years ago? I mean, is it survivable?
I think it is sustainable. I think the public needs, though, to understand that it can't keep coming for free.
Right.
And we need support.
They always thought it was free, but
Yes.
they just didn't understand what the real model was.
Right, and we're still trying to figure out that model.
Yeah.
I mean, down the road, I think it's it's no secret that every brand, whether it's Washington Post, New York Times, which has had enormously successful digital subscription models, they're able to sustain their operations by having some digital revenue coming in. I think at some point every legacy media brand like ours is going to have to look to that.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, we're going to have options. You know, if in media in general, not everybody's going to want that print product. You know, it's not really a millennial thing. Now, I wish some millennials would subscribe, but if they're not going to, we've got to give them a digital.
Reach them the other way.
Yeah, we got to reach them digitally through the phone and through the computer. So that's what we're wrestling with, as is every brand across the country.
Right. And of course, in the end, I mean, you know, the whole notion of cutting down forests and pulping it into paper and trucking it here, and it seems like not just from a few decades ago, it seems like from a few centuries ago, and it's really kind of an outdated model, but it still exists, and it's going to exist for some time, I presume. Do you have any? I always ask this question. Do you have any guess about how long? Well, what about your paper? You think it'll still be printing 10 years from now? Assuming that everything is, assuming that you don't have calamities, that you're successful in your plan.
Well, it's hard to judge 10 years from now. It's hard to judge 10 days from now.
I totally agree. And it's a stupid question, but it's just something that I think we all like to...
But it's a fair question. I mean, I think it's not just newspapers. It's the 10 o'clock news
it's
on TV.
Absolutely right. Yes.
You know, it's Morning Edition. It's like, how do we end up... You know, it's cable. I mean, you know, as people cut the cord.
It's your music radio station.
Right. How is it all regulated?
Yeah.
You know, as we all head kind of into the same space where we can all provide kind of the same content in terms of delivery methods, video, broadcast,
because ultimately
text.
it all is being delivered to one place.
Right.
Really, I mean, it almost
and then
doesn't matter.
How do we all compete with each other to just that little screen, right? And so it's hard to really answer your question succinctly.
I understand, but I just wondered if you'd given any thought, because it's just
I think about it every day, but I don't. I go to bed at night not having a great answer. But
and the only consolation you have is that nobody else has it either, because if they did, it would have happened by now.
Right.
Of course, I always say that well, until DNA happened, I said the model for saving journalism is get yourself a billionaire, because the Washington Post is like the perfect example of how to run a newspaper.
Boston Globe too.
Boston Globe.
And Minneapolis.
But then you see with DNA that the big guy gets upset about unionization or something and pulls the plug one afternoon and it's over, right? So.
Yeah. But there's a lot of lessons in DNA, and we'll see if how Block Club maybe takes what was learned at DNA and maybe tweaks it a little bit and makes it successful.
Yeah. Chris, it's just so interesting talking to you. I could just do this for hours, but we got to let you... Who's running the store anyway?
Here.
What's going on over there? That sometimes is without an editor-in-chief at the moment. He's sitting here.
Yeah.
Go back to work.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. No, we've got a good team of people back minding the shop for the past hour.
They're not just walking around saying, "I don't know what to do."
No,
Chris is off doing some interview.
They are. They're a sharp bunch.
I'm sure that's true.
Super sharp.
Chris, it's a pleasure, and I hope you'll come back again sometime. Although we won't bother you for a while, but
okay.
We'll see what we can do. All right.
Great. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the update.
Chris
Fusco is the editor-in-chief of the Chicago Sun-Times and all of its affiliated operations and digital enterprises, and we're really very pleased to have him here at the table today. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a presentation of CAN TV, as you well know. You can go to this address on your device, and you can watch this show anytime you want, or any of the others, because they're all right there, and we hope you'll do exactly that. Okay, thanks. We'll see you next week with another program right here on CAN TV. Bye-bye for now.